All right, looks like I'm successfully live once again with no errors, which is nice, as YouTube often loves to do with the errors. And because last week was so well received, I figured I would do another live about a week later, and we'll see if anyone shows up, which would be funny if people really didn't show up, considering what was going on last week in the chat. But maybe I'll just plan ahead next time and actually start scheduling live streams at specific times and specific dates so that people can tune in and actually plan ahead. Basically, I have a bit of an outline written again to sort of steer the subject matter of the live stream. And I think it's something that'll resonate and make sense for a lot of people, especially anyone who's actually followed my content for more than 5 minutes. And what really made this stand out to me was basically when I did all the face analysis months ago, I noticed a pretty commonality or a pretty common pattern and a commonality and sort of a unifying thing within pretty much everyone that I did a reading for. And then these were all people that had followed my content for a period of time, which then revealed that probably certain things that are a bit universal in terms of my experience resonate with people who have followed my content as well, which is not really any groundbreaking or revelation or revelatory concept, but that's what I want to get into a bit more in this particular live stream, and why the live stream itself is called The Hidden Tax of what is it called? I forgot what I called it. The Hidden Exhaustion of Managing Down. Yeah. So I think this is something that maybe anyone watching this or anyone following my content has felt or does feel, but maybe hasn't been able to put their finger on. So I'll just get into the content now, and I'll come back for Q&A and stuff. But basically, I just want to be clear from the start that what I'm going to talk about, it isn't like a blanket validation. It's more so understanding that pattern recognition is a skill. And like with any skill, it can be miscalibrated, it can be wrong. It can be just contrarianism dressed up as something else, which can just be another form of self-deception, which I can say that some people followed my content or would interpret things that I would put out as just being angry or just being mean or just being depressed or whatever, which is actually not true. And that's not really where I'm coming from. I think that just sometimes people have a hard time figuring out exactly what something is, so they just try to get the simplest explanation, the most emotional sort of simplest thing possible. And that's not really the case. That's not what I'm really talking about here at all. Because really, in my mind, in my experience, feeling and emotion and stuff is in some ways secondary to actually being accurate. So especially as it relates to pattern recognition. So I was saying, as with any skill, it can be miscalibrated. And the exhaustion that I'm talking about is just, I'm describing, comes from accurate perception in a deceptive environment, which basically is a lot of the world, because a lot of the world and society and things function off of a certain level of deceit, a certain social lubricant of like, I'll validate your BS if you validate mine, and we'll never question each other on it. We'll both say things to each other that we know aren't true, but we'll both just kind of go along with it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just part of life. That's part of how things are structured. That's how things can be functional to an extent. However, there's a cost to that. And if that's all the way someone lives, then that can be a bit of a deficit. And especially for people who are not necessarily wired that way, for people who are maybe wired a little differently or have different interests, different levels of depth, let's say, that can be suffocating, that can be frustrating, that can be deeply unsatisfactory, right? But when you're dealing with this all the time, there can be an exhaustion, then there's clearly a tax that's being paid. And on the flip side, there's also a type of exhaustion that comes from maintaining a story about ourselves that isn't true either, like contrarianism or persecution narratives or just reflexive distrust, which are in and of themselves their own kind of noise. So the goal isn't really to feel vindicated. The goal is to actually see clearly and be accurate. So I just want to get that long-winded disclaimer out of the way. So basically, there's a kind of exhaustion that really wouldn't show up on any test, meaning you could sleep, you could rest, you could do everything right, and you could still be tired. You could almost be tired in a way that's not physical. It's something deeper. It's not just emotional. It's something deeper. And if you've been watching the channel for a while, again, as I've just repeated, I don't know how many times already, then you probably have some inkling or some experience with what I'm talking about. And I call this kind of the translation tax, where every interaction or many interactions where someone says one thing but means another, then you are probably doing some work. You're taking the surface signal, running it through pattern recognition, figuring out what's actually happening, and then trying to figure out some sort of response that actually functions in the real world without blowing things up. And that's basically, numerous cognitive steps that most people aren't even ever doing. Or if they are doing it, they have no awareness of it, but usually they're not even doing it. It's just really at this sort of surface level. So basically, if we're doing this multiple times a day, every day for many years, that is a tax on our system. That's an invisible thing we're running all the time and kind of paying for it constantly. And the reason why no one really talks about this is because probably most people aren't experiencing it. Like I just said, they're not translating, they're just accepting surface signal and moving on. They're just taking everything at face value and like, oh, well, the authority said it, or this person said it, or it was on TV, it was on the news, so it must be true, moving on. And again, this could be basically on any side of the political spectrum. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm speaking to something beyond that. I'm talking about people, because the commonality and the common denominator between all political sides of any spectrum or any subject or any agreement or disagreement is humans, and everyone is running human OS to varying degrees of slight gradation, but ultimately the core technology is fundamentally pretty much the same. And the reason why that is not clear and obvious to everyone is just an absence of clarity and discernment, meaning most of what exists in the world is just noise and confusion. Got fuzz on my hood or on my hoodie. So what seems complicated or confusing is actually just confusion in the absence of clarity and discernment. But like an apple is not an orange, and an orange is not a pear is not a hammer. Like, it sounds stupid and banal to say that, but the same thing applies to so many things in life, where it is actually that level of simplicity and clarity. It's just people are caught up in their emotions, they're stressed, they're tribal signaling, they're being governed by all these different things that are not really based in clarity or discernment, let's say. So I just wanted to make that caveat there, because people love to polarize. So yeah, as I was saying, if people are not translating, they just accept the surface signal and move on. So then basically they can't really understand why you might be exhausted. So there's not really any external obvious reason that you could point to that everyone would be like, oh, I get that. It's just maybe a normal day. And that gap between what's actually experienced and what's actually legible to others is in essence, its own type of tax. And then it's not really just a mental thing, like just a constant intellectual thing, although it can obviously appear to be that way. It's really more so that someone's nervous system is constantly running low-grade vigilance, because at some point maybe they learned, or they just are aware that the environment isn't always what it presents itself to be, which isn't necessarily anxiety and it's not necessarily disorder. It could, in some cases, just be an accurate response to an inaccurate signal environment. And the problem isn't necessarily that someone has that sensitivity or they have that perception or awareness. It's just that they're calibrated to a reality in which a world that basically runs on a certain degree of fiction in order to just kind of grease the wheels and keep everything going. And I think, again, to circle back to my caveat, is that contrarianism, persecution narratives, reflective distrust of everything, lofty conspiracy ideas, all these types of things, sometimes, of course, are true and sometimes, of course, are accurate, but oftentimes they can be their own kind of noise and be just as draining. So what I'm talking about here isn't just to feel vindicated or feel really anything, is actually to see clearly. And that means also being just as willing to question our own perceptions and our own nonsense and realize that ultimately we're all on the same level playing field. Again, we're running human OS. We are humans. We are living in this world. I just say this because there's a certain danger with intelligence where you can be smart enough to be smart, but not smart enough to realize how dumb you are, and not smart enough to make your life easier. So I know people who are smart across the varying degrees of context, and a lot of them just become really good at making themselves miserable and unhappy, overcomplicating their lives, getting, shoehorned into dogmas or ideologies or what have you. And personally, that doesn't strike me as the most effective or useful or rewarding way of living, which is why presented with the two options, which is what people usually think it is. People are, ignorance is bliss. Well, that's where that comes from. Well, ignorance is bliss relative to just being smart enough to make your life miserable, but not smart enough to make your life enjoyable. Like, people think that's all there is to it, but I don't think that's the case. And my experience has not been that, actually. And many people I know also that has not been their experience. So really, it comes down to being able to hold kind of both of these things to be true at once, meaning you can see clearly and you also might be wrong, because that's where actually the usefulness comes in, because that's when things become more actionable, because then the first step to managing that cost is knowing what it is, where it's going, and being honest enough to audit it. Meaning, what I was circling back to what I was saying earlier about, it's not about feeling a certain type of way. It's actually about being clear and accurate and useful, which requires pressure testing, which requires pressure testing against environment, pressure testing over time, which is what I've said many, many times over many years across many different subjects that I've talked about, is people will have very lofty ideas, lofty ideals, lofty theories. And I always say, okay, cool. What are you doing with that? Have you tested it? If you really believe that, then are you actually living it? Have you actually gone out into the world and done anything with it? Or is it just, a cool thing that you have on a shelf somewhere that gives you a certain feeling and stimulates your tribal operating system and makes you feel better than someone else? Because to me, that sounds exactly like the thing that it's allegedly an alternative to. So for me, that's kind of what all my videos and all my content have always been and always tried to be, is that here's what I think or what I've arrived at. And this is after a lot of actual pressure testing and reality mapping and testing in different contexts and instances to see if it actually holds up, or if it's just some tribal nonsense or some emotional reactivity. To me, that's the most sensible thing and the most human thing to do, since we are alive. We do have allegedly some degree of free will. If we do think life is precious, if we do think life is valuable, if we do think life is, an opportunity or a blessing, then okay, maybe actively participate in that process rather than just, being a passive observer, guzzling other people's opinions or guzzling whatever, media silo is feeding into our system, and just being content with that. So yeah, like I said, it's basically understanding that maybe we're running an expensive operating system, maybe not. And maybe the first step to managing that cost is knowing what it is, where it's going, and then being actually honest enough to audit it. And first and foremost, being honest enough with ourselves. And again, not just getting consumed with whatever feels right in the moment, but what actually works in the real world. So that's pretty much all I had for my outline. I just wanted to drop those concepts, at least as a opening thing, because it's something that I think a lot of people deal with. Because if we use the image of the bell curve and understand that most approaches, most information, most philosophy, most isms are for the bell curve. So if we're not in that median average of the bell curve, then that information probably won't really be that helpful, or people will look at us and just scratch their head. And this is what I learned, from 20 years of being in the healing, therapy, whatever, self-improvement niche, whatever you want to call it, is that actual insight and actual oomph or lived intelligence is pretty rare. But what's very common is people who are just adept at some ism or adept at one little framework, or they go to like the other extreme where they're like a Paul Check type, and they just have smoked so much weed and have just like a slightly above average brain that can remember so much information. So they just appear really smart, but it's just sophisticated stupidity, because it's all just eventually defaults back to the like oneness nonsense, or it's all the same, it's all from the same source, it's all this. And it's like, actually, no, it isn't. It's just that you're convoluted, or you smoke so much weed that your pattern recognition matching sort of part of your brain just went into overdrive and just turned everything into one like cosmic soup mush for like muddled hippie well-to-do people typically. And so someone will go, I've studied 39 different lineages from 39 different parts that go back to all the way to ancient Atlantis, so I know the real thing. And then you get down to it, and it's really just the same old recycled whatever. And it's like, cool. So I could just have skipped all of this and just feel good. Okay, all right, cool. All right. I didn't really need all this other stuff when all you're going to tell me is just feel good, do things that you like. Wow, what an idea. Like if you, this is what gets me, is if people need all this cosmic paraphernalia in language and sort of masturbatory porn for the mind just to arrive at triviality, muddled stuff, it just seems like, again, sophisticated stupidity with a bunch of extra steps. It's like people that I follow online or I've seen for 15, 20 years, they've been psychonauts and plant medicine enthusiasts, channeling ancient knowledge for modern people and doing all this stuff. And it's like, 20 years, what do you have to show for it? A bunch of experiences, or like insightful revelations that everyone already knew before. And it's just like creating a self-created hamster wheel, which is what I was saying earlier about people being smart enough to make their lives infinitely more difficult and convoluted, but not smart enough to make their life much simpler, more concise, organized, precise, efficient, effective, enjoyable, all these things. Well, Ari, as I stated in the beginning, I was going to read through my outline that I had to basically set the tonality for what I was going to talk about. And I reached the completion of that, and I was just tying up a few loose ends. And then I was going to get back to the questions. That's usually how it goes. So aptly timed. As I finish that, now I'll get to the questions. Ari says, do you think working an unfulfilling job depletes your energy? Depends. I would think yeah, I mean, it just depends. If you can turn it into something that is more fulfilling or a means to an end, but I don't think it's necessarily a finite thing. And I would say usually people have that idea because they hear some sort of like follow your bliss or live your passion or these types of ideas, which I don't, like I see the allure and I see where people are coming from, but I think that rationality is usually just people who maybe want to do Peter Pan, things of that nature. Because at least in my experience and what I've seen based on people, what actually does create fulfillment is things like meaning, purpose, human connection, things of that nature. No worries. So I can say that, at least for me personally, I can share an anecdote that might be useful for this question, is that I've had a lot of terrible jobs in my life, working at Taco Bell, working fast food, working Taco Bell in small town Indiana, late night shifts, going to college full time and working 3 jobs on top of it, going to high school, playing sports and working, part-time job on top of that, not in a good way. And working coffee shops, juice bars, libraries, apartment maintenance, trash disposal, like some stuff that's just was so bad. So my point is that I sort of just mentally mapped a larger trajectory and tried to make those situations as best as they could be. So for example, find some way to use it as fuel for whatever the next thing is or whatever thing you're moving towards, and try to, step by step find better opportunities. Or just if it's one of these things where it's like a corporate welfare or corporate daycare kind of job where not very much is required, but the pay is really good, then just maximize it for what it is. Live off of as little as you can, save and invest as much as you can, and then give yourself runway to do other things. Practically speaking, I think that's what really the only realistic options are. And just, cliche advice, try to make the best of it for what you can. But what is the effect of music on the nervous system? I think it depends on the music, depends on the person, but I think you could probably find other videos or other content that could answer that better than I can, because it's not really my focus or forte. I actually don't listen to music at all whatsoever. I used to be a big music aficionado for most of my 20s and 30s, but I have no real interest or appetite for it whatsoever. Occasionally, but it doesn't really do a lot, and I don't really have much interest in it. I can appreciate it. If I hear something, some classical piece or something that is obviously, something that someone poured a lot into, then yeah, you can appreciate that for what it is. But personally, it just doesn't really do a lot for me. I think it just stimulates people's emotions and their nervous system and their fight or flight response to varying degrees, which is, nothing wrong with it. I don't think everyone has to live in the way in which I do. It's just after training certain things for so many years, my system is the way it is now, and just things of that nature just aren't really appealing, and they don't really do anything. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask about that. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had for the outline. And if there's not really questions, then I won't really stick around because I don't really have anything else. But yeah, the different frequencies, if you want to get into that thing, which I guess is a little different from music, like, 528, 432, these types of things certainly can have effects on people, but it's not necessarily music. That's more sound healing or frequency healing, that sort of thing. I think that can be cool. I think that can have effects on people. I think it's really overstated. I think it's really not doing what people claim. I think it's just relaxing, helps people calm down, which that's not nothing. I mean, that's a very useful thing. So for sure. But I don't know that it's like melting tumors and attracting abundance and activating your third eye, all that stuff. No, I think it just relaxes people and it's soothing and it sounds nice. So that's good. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, especially in comparison to so much of the other noise and sort of aggressive, dysfunctional frequencies that exist around us all the time. So yeah, I think that's definitely something to that. Sorry, I'm just going to pull up my... Also, too, if you're not subscribed to my Substack, I would highly recommend it, because I post there more regularly and much more longer form, in-depth stuff, because it's sometimes a little easier for me to just write an article than it is to sit down and film a video and such. So I'll drop the link in the chat. Yeah, isn't that always how it goes? This is what I was talking about in the last live stream. I showed up last week after not doing a live stream for 4 months or so, and I figured no one would show up, so I had a really long outline that I was going to read over, and then it was the opposite. A bunch of people showed up, and there was a lot of questions, so I didn't even do the outline. Today, I gave myself a very thin, minimal outline. I was expecting that, but it's the other side of things where there's less people and less questions. So I'm just sitting here. That's just how it goes. But like I said, maybe scheduling will mitigate that. Lorraine says, one of your articles last week was really helpful. That's good news. I'm glad you liked it. And thanks for reading and subscribing. I'm curious which one it was, which article, because I think I posted almost every day last week. And then how was it helpful? Just curious, because I don't really talk to people about it. It's just, people read it. Most people don't engage. Most people don't comment. Most people don't really do it. So I'm just curious to see how, which one it was and which one was helpful. Because I've been cranking them out lately. And I have a lot more coming and a lot more in the works. So my issue is just not pummeling people with content, because I could post long form articles pretty much every day. I could do hour videos every day. I could do that. That's no problem. My issue is just time releasing it and kind of like trying to do shorts or digestible things. So yeah. Also, too, I just wanted to update anyone who tunes in late, because last week we talked about some sandalwood oil, agarwood oil, and incense. I already had some people reach out about the incense, and I've been in the process of selling them. I need to ship those out. Today's Wednesday. I'm aiming to ship those out this week. I should have the labels tomorrow, so they'll be good to go. And then the sandalwood oil I'll have on the way soon, which again is the best sandalwood oil that I've ever tried, ever, period, end of story. It's absolutely the best. It's like unbelievably good and very potent, very loud, very projectile, let's say, in terms of its aroma. And then the Hainan agarwood oil that I sold, I don't know, 8 years ago or something. It's 5 years ago. It's crazy it's been that long, but however long ago I sold it, 2018, 2019, I'll have some of that on the way as well. And so that'll be cool. There'll be some new products coming among the others. So there'll be, a lot of new stuff coming soon. And I'm going to get back into doing podcasts well, not my own, but having people. I'll be on other people's shows, basically. So yeah, that's it. That's pretty much all I got. Any suggestions for achy muscles from PT? I assume you mean physical therapy. I mean, yeah, a hot Epsom salt bath would be good, especially the article I posted, I think last week, about dirt cheap health hacks, where you put like an entire bag of Epsom salts in a bath. That's really good. Or like infrared sauna, things of that nature, because you just kind of need to move the blood. Or you can do a shower where you alternate hot and cold, which will kind of like pump your blood a little bit, and then that'll usually knock out any achy muscles or soreness pretty quick, because it's really just about the fluid turnover most of the time. And those are all pretty cheap and easy things to do. And like the shower one is easy. It's free. You're already showering, hopefully. And then, a bag or two of Epsom salts in a hot bath, soaking for 15 minutes or whatever, 20 minutes. It's pretty cheap as well and very effective, very relaxing. Infrared sauna, you can probably find some studio and do a session for like $30. That's pretty easy to do, especially in the wintertime. Got to keep the blood moving, basically, is what it comes down to. If you keep your blood moving, your blood circulation improving, you'll feel better across the board. Doesn't matter. Everything will get better. You'll feel better. You have more energy. The reason why people feel heavy, lethargic, is fluid stagnation. That's it. And a lot of times people feel depressed or like heavy, lethargic. Same thing, it's just fluids. If they move their fluids, get things moving around, they'll feel better, especially chronically. People think blood sort of is just always rushing around the body. It's actually not the case. It tends to pool and stagnate a lot more than people think. So it's really important to keep it moving, especially during the wintertime, especially as people maybe age and that yang in their body goes down. Got to keep it moving. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got. Like I said, I already read through the outline, so there's not really so many more questions in the chat. As I said, it's reversed last week, which is how it goes. And I'm tired from a long day of training and writing and working. So I will leave it here then and figure out maybe when to start scheduling these. Probably Wednesday or Thursday around the same time, 5 p.m. Pacific is probably what I'll do. Just because that's when I'm usually done with everything, all my work and training for the day. And then I'm usually able to do this before I crash out for the night. Anyways, if you tune in late, make sure to go back in the beginning and watch what I went through. And then once the transcript is available on YouTube, I'll do what I've been doing previously, which is post the chapters and timestamps so that you can find exactly what was said when. You don't have to sit through the whole thing. But anyways, thanks for everyone who tuned in, and appreciate the engagement and things of that nature, and for following what I do. And hopefully this idea of the invisible, what did I even call it? The exhaustion of managing down, or the translation tax. And what I was saying earlier about the face readings is the pattern I was noticing for pretty much everyone that I did a face reading for, is that in most instances in their life, they were the stabilizer, they were the stabilizing factor, or they were the designated adult. And that usually, from what I could tell, went back all the way to when they were kids and had been a constant theme through their life, which that emotionally has certain predictable effects on people and leaves people with certain deficits within themselves. Primarily, they were never really met. They were always just seen as kind of like a utility to people. And they're used to people just, projecting onto them, which is, a lot of times people don't even know they're doing it. It's just an unconscious response that people have if they encounter someone who is a designated adult, or someone who is like a stabilizer, or if you want to use those like teeter-totters on kids' playgrounds, the thing in the middle that it balances on. At least from what I saw from a lot of the face readings, a lot of people were that middle balancing point for their family dynamics. And that obviously isn't ideal. That's not necessarily a position that kids are supposed to be in, but it seems to be one that a lot of people are put in, for better or worse. And what I realized for myself pretty early on in my life is that there's really no content for those people. There's really no guidebook. There's no therapy. There's really not much that's effective that isn't just more of pathologizing things and just, here's an ism, here's some framework someone made up, and here's a bunch of labels, and all we have for you is labels and crying and emotions and more mental strain, more anxiety, that I don't think is that productive. At least for me personally, I didn't see any value in pursuing those types of things. And I haven't seen many other people that have as well. Unless, you just need to pay a lot of money for a liberal to eventually get you to agree with them and sell you on their, sort of Marxist, communist, victimization worldview, which is more or less what a lot of the therapy industry is now, unfortunately. Obviously, yes, there's exceptions. There's, skilled practitioners, or people that are more nuts and bolts, people that are more direct and, practical. But from what I've seen, from what I've heard, and from what's available in the world, that seems to be the exception rather than the norm. So I think in some ways, for a lot of my content over the years, I think maybe that's something that people resonated with, is speaking to those things to varying degrees. I think sometimes people just resonated with the fact that I made fun of it in a sarcastic way that was humorous, or they perceived me as just angry when I really wasn't, or whatever other things. It's just, over the years, I've met people, I've talked to them, and it's just, you'd be surprised the interpretations or the assumptions, the incorrect assumptions that people would have after, watching videos, which is an education in and of itself. But whatever, that's just human life. Doesn't really make much of a difference. I just basically have always just tried to tell the truth, meaning, here's what I think, here's how I got there, here's why I think it's useful. Take it or leave it. Doesn't really make a difference. It just seems to me the most honest thing you can do, rather than being a bit patronizing and condescending, which is how a lot of people are, or just doing validating, or just trying to like babysit adults, which I don't really have any interest in, which is why, as an example, I don't really teach internal arts stuff, because I get emails from people, and usually it's just adults looking to be babysat and not really wanting to engage in a clear way, which is not appealing as a teacher, and it's a real energy drain. And it's just, there's just no need. There's plenty of other people that would be more than willing and happy to fill that role. So for me, what I'm trying to get at is it just doesn't make sense to put someone in that role who doesn't want to be there when there's plenty of people who would love to be there. So that's just simple math, in my opinion. So yeah, Big Crazy T says, thanks for everything, learning so much. Appreciate it. Glad stuff is helpful. If you have any requests for content or subject matter, feel free to drop it in a comment, and I'll do my best to cover it and answer the question as best I can, or at least point you to a video that I've already done that would cover it, because I do have 950 videos. It's just, it's all buried and it's old and it's hard to sort through. So anyways, I just wanted to kind of plant the seeds for some of these ideas. I have a lot more, and I'll be talking about more in the future. So you can let me know if it resonates or it makes sense, and we can continue it more in the future, and I can do more content based around this. But yeah, anyways, hope everyone has a good night wherever they are. I'm really tired. I'm like, my verbal engine is not at 100%, so I'm gonna go drink water and then eat food and rest. So anyways, thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate your support and all the questions and engagement, and I will see you on the next one.